question of why a person writes poetry at all is an almost unanswerable one. I know for me, originally, it was a magical activity. It was my way of bringing a kind of order to my experience and to the world, a world which is essentially chaotic and disorganized. And I felt that in writing, in putting words in a certain way on paper, I had gained a sort of control, sort of power over my environment. And this was an almost magical power. I think the main theme or attitude that emerges through my poetry is one of celebration and one of an affirmation of life. I find that art should give us a means whereby we can transcend the ordinary, the sort of suffering that our lives entail, and that should offer us something beyond, and certainly something spiritual and something wonderful. When I sit down to write a poem, it's not really a matter of being blindly inspired all at once and just dashing it off and there it is. It's a very conscious and time-consuming thing. But I do begin with lines which have very often come to me in a flash, lines which have come to me just before sleeping, for instance, or walking along the street. But those lines in themselves are not sufficient to create the poem. The poem comes afterwards with a lot of thought and hard work, a lot of rewriting often. This land, like a mirror, turns you inward, and you become a forest in a furtive lake. The dark pines of your mind reach downward. You dream in the green of your time. Your memory is a row of sinking pines. Explorer, you tell yourself this is not what you came for, although it is good here and green. You had meant to move with a kind of largeness. You had planned a heavy grace, an anguished dream. But the dark pines of your mind dip deeper, and you are sinking, sleeper, in an elementary world. There is something down there, and you want it told. I began writing very early, actually. I was scribbling away when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. And I was quite seriously writing poetry when I was 14 and 15 in high school. And my first poem was published when I was 17 in the Canadian Forum. And then I left school shortly thereafter when I was 18 and began writing seriously. I was born right here in Toronto, and I grew up around the High Park area, High Park and Bloor. So my earliest memories are from the park and from Sunnyside Beach. This poem was written in another country entirely. It was written in Egypt when I had gone inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. Inside the Great Pyramid. All day, the narrow shaft received us. Everyone came out sweating and gasping for air, and one old man collapsed upon a stair. I thought, the fact that it has stood so long is no guarantee it will stand today, but went in anyway, and heard when I was halfway up a long, low rumbling like the echo of ancient stones first straining to their place. I thought, we have made this. We have made this. I scrambled out into the scandalous sun and saw the desert with an hourglass we had forgotten to invert. A tasseled camel falling to his knees. The river filling the great water clock of earth. Certain poems come to me as a result of a single line which is so tantalizing and so thrilling that I know it contains the seed of a poem. And other times there'll be a fusion between an idea which I've been carrying around with me for some time and perhaps even a title, a fusion of things that will set it off. I'd been thinking about writing the T. Lawrence poems ever since I'd been in Israel and staying in a hotel in Tiberias. And the old gentleman who was the proprietor of the hotel invited me down one evening for tea and showed me these marvelous old sepia tone photographs he had on the wall. They were photographs of riders on camels. And I was fascinated, and I went up to one, and he said, well, it's Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. And he said, did you know that I rode with him? And so he proceeded to tell me stories of the days when he was a sheriff in the wild East. And from that time, the idea of Lawrence and the Lawrence poems been with me. But I didn't actually start writing the Lawrence poems until 1982. The first poem is called Water. When you think of it, water is everything. Or rather, water ventures into everything and becomes everything. It has all tastes and moods imaginable. Water is history, and the end of the world is water also. I have tasted water from London to Miranshah. In France, it tasted of crusaders' breastplates, swords, and tunnels of rings on ladies' fingers. In the springs of Lebanon, water had no color and was therefore all colors. Outside of Damascus, it disguised itself as snow and let it be chopped and spooned onto the stunned red grapes of summer. For years I have defended water, even though I am told there are other drinks. Water will never lie to you, even when it insinuates itself into someone else's territory. Water has style. Water has no conscience and no shame. Water thrives on water. It is self-quenching. It often tastes of brine and ammonia and always knows its way back home. When you want to travel very far, do as the Bedouin do. Drink to overflowing when you can, and then go sparingly between wells. I had thought at one point of perhaps doing a novel of Lawrence, but then I realized that the only way was through poetry. He himself admired poets, was in awe of poets, and he himself attempted some poetry. It was not particularly good, but it was very interesting in that he had these marvelous long lines when he did write. So I found myself in these poems writing in those long lines and trying to achieve the sort of voice and the sort of poetry that he might have written, given a lot of other circumstances. And so, consequently, the book is in the first person, Lawrence, and I adopt the persona of Lawrence. And very often you'll find lines from Lawrence's own lines from the Seven Pillars of Wisdom, or from various letters, interwoven throughout the poems. Solar wind. It comes upon you unawares, something racing out of the edge of your vision, as when you are staring at something and not staring, looking through, a herd of white horses grazing on the periphery of your sight, and the afternoon slanting into night. Comes the wind that is the color of the sun, and your eyes, which are nuggets of gold, follow it down the barrels of the rifles, through the gun cotton and over the culverts, leaving everything gold, gold in its wake. The past and the future are burning up. The present melts down the middle, a river of wind, wind from the sun, gold wind, anything. And suddenly You know that all mysteries have been solved for you, all questions answered. You must find a God to worship or you will die in that unholy moment just before the darkness and the sound of guns. Essentially, this sequence of poems, the Lawrence poems, is about a man in a very agonizing search for his own soul, for his own spiritual validity, a man who was tormented by doubts, tormented by the fact that he was not a hero, however much the world insisted upon treating him as a hero. A man of multiple paradoxes, and I love paradoxes. So that was why I was drawn to this subject and this man. The desert. Only God lives there, in the seductive nothing that implodes into pure light. English makes him an ugly monosyllable, but Allah breathes a fiery music from his tongue, ignites the sands, invents a terrible love that is the very name of pain. The desert preserves him as the prophets found him, massive and alone. They went there into that awful zero to interpret him, for himself to know, for he said, "Help me, I am the one who is alone, not you. Tell me who I am." Camels lean into the desert, lost in some thought so profound it can only be guessed. When will God invent man? When will the great dream end? My skin crawls with a horrible beauty in this nothingness, this everything. I fall to my knees in the deep white sand, and my head implodes into pure light. Towards the end of his life, one of Lawrence's great pleasures, perhaps his only remaining pleasure, was riding at great speed on his motorcycle. And in fact, as we know it, that was how he met his death eventually. He called all his motorcycles by the name of Boanerges, which is the title of this poem. I call all my grand bikes sons of thunder, or devil horses, as Auda would have said. Someone warned me I'd break my neck on my present one. I said, that's better than dying in bed, or walking down some street with its hungry doors and falling off the curb into someone else's death. At the very least, I want my death to be my own. Meanwhile, I eat the miles, shape myself to the flashing contours of the hills, know myself to be streets ahead of everyone. I ride this wild motor god till my guts explode like seeds of dynamite, then fizzle out into perfect nothing. Now every night I pray the Lord my soul to keep and make sure everything's alive before I go to sleep. So no matter how dark my poetry might become at times, it's always an affirmation, always a celebration. Poetry is intensely personal, intensely private.